Hey guys, Josh with the Update Channel, and today we're out in a place called Chilco, which is actually pretty close to Coeur d'Alene, but what I'm looking at here is a C13. And what's going on with it? Well, it's a C13 and it's got IVA problems. And I've noticed over the last couple years that I've worked on a few of these IVA problems that people say, hey, we replaced the solenoids, we've replaced the wiring harness, we've replaced the IVA oil pressure sensor. It's still got this IVA problem. And usually what I find is what they're talking about is an actual IVA oil pressure problem, not an IVA problem. So the IVA system, or VVAs, are oil fed, and the oil does basically all the work, and they're electronically controlled. And a lot of people mess with the electronically controlled side, but don't necessarily mess with the oil side, and don't seem to realize how important it is. So this seems like it may be what's going on with this one. I'm going to show you what the codes are real quick, and then we'll see if we can figure it out, and maybe something simple. That would be pretty nice. So here's what we're looking at basically. Low intake valve actuation system oil pressure and IVA oil pressure not responding. It's always good to take a look at the diagnostic clock. We're at 18901, and that's how many key on engine hours this thing has had. 131 occurrences, and last time was basically 2 engine hours ago. So this is occurring quite often and occurring quite recently. Let's see what's going on. So this is a local trucking company here, and they have a ton of Cat engines. And they have their own on-site mechanics, and they're actually the ones that had tried to fix this IVA problem. They actually had codes for number 3 and number 4 not responding. So they had replaced the center housing before. So I'd suspected that these oil pressure faults might be related to what they had just done. But of course you never know. And the mechanics that worked on it are pretty competent also, but you never know what's going on. Also, folks, mechanics, at least me, hate bolts with nuts. It's always a pain to have to use 2 tools to remove a fastener, when normally you can just do it with 1. Now, do I have to pull this intake housing off here? Not necessarily. You could remove the valve cover without pulling this air filter housing, but I'm going to be doing a pretty thorough inspection of the overhead, especially with it running, so I don't want this air filter housing to be in the way, because if it's something in the back, I might miss it. So definitely want to pull this filter housing off. And in this instance, it's pretty easy to get off. It's just 4 bolts, although they do have nuts on them, which makes it a pain in the butt. And then just pull the tube off here, and we should be able to get this big old air filter out of the way, and then get the valve cover off and out of the way. All right, got her off there. We're going to set it right here. Try to leave air filters not on the ground. You never want something getting into them. And something happened here, so I dropped a washer for one of the bolts, and I couldn't find it for a little bit, but it was in the weirdest location. I couldn't have done this again if I tried, but it actually fell on one of the other studs for the valve cover. Just thought that was funny. So we'll put that over there on the table, and we'll get to getting this actual valve cover off itself. So we're going to speed things along here, get this valve cover off. I love C13 valve covers because it's one valve cover for all the overhead, and there's only a couple bolts that hold it on there. Not like that, they don't leak very often, and the gasket is reusable for the most part. So one of the better designs, I think. So once we get this puppy off, we're going to put it on the table next to our friendly air filter. Got my phone out of the way. And then we're going to take a look at this overhead and see if anything is apparent. So this is a C13 overhead. If you've never seen one before, hopefully you have if you've watched my videos, but a lot going on there. This has IVAs, of course. This one has Jake brakes. It's an EUI engine, so you've got electronic unit injectors. You've got intake and valve rocker arms. So right there, this is the center housing. I'm looking at where the O-ring meets the housing to see if it's cracked or anything looks weird there. There's your IVA oil pressure sensor and the valve cover base. And I don't see anything super apparent yet because everything looks to be in good order. Just looking for cracks, broken parts, anything like that. There's a little purge port there. I'll show you when it's running, and it likes to spray oil everywhere. But yeah, just looking over, it's pretty clean. I don't see any signs of moisture or anything, not that I would. Now it feeds oil through the head to the valve cover base and then runs up here to the IVA oil pressure sensor, and then it feeds out through that, which is the purge oil port or the warm-up port. That's your IVA oil pressure sensor there. And yeah, it feeds oil to each individual housing, and each one has a big old O-ring. So looking right here where the O-ring is seated, obviously you can't see it with the housing on there, but what we're going to do is we're going to start it and then see what we see. So she's running here. Some of you might be wondering if I left that rag over the intake tube there. I did not. That would have sucked it in. Best thing to do is I have a little air filter that I usually put on, although I didn't have it in this instance. So what I did is I moved the tubing so that it's away just in case it's spraying oil everywhere. So you can see the purge valve here is purging oil out right by that #1 injector there. And that's what it's supposed to do. But what I'm looking for is any other really big oil leaks around this housing. So yeah, there's a huge oil leak there in that center housing where the O-ring's supposed to be, between the housing and the IVA housing. It's like the beginning of Beverly Hillbillies there. Yeah, there's just oil everywhere. Well, looks like we found it. How about a little destruction of the week? This week's destruction of the week comes from Aaron, and this is a little generator, and he said it was brought to them because the container it was in was damaged and it caused this damage. Okay, he said this was probably not caused by the container being damaged.
Flex seal won't fix that.
That's pretty broken there. Luckily it was a Perkins, not a Cat, but hate to see any engine with that. That is one dang broken engine there. So what do we got going on here? Well, it looks like that housing that they had installed there, well, it does look like they installed it correctly. I don't see any missing fasteners or anything. It's got a big leak there. So what happens is the oil's fed through the valve cover base up to these housings. And I've seen it a couple times where for some reason the O-ring gets left out or they use the wrong one. The last one I did actually, it's also a C13. I didn't get a video of it though. It was a few months ago. The customer had replaced all 3 housings and didn't use any of the O-rings. That one was actually harder to find because each one was leaking less because obviously the volume doesn't change. It's just spread out over 3, whereas this one looks like it has 1 leak. So we're getting our IVA housing off here and just looking to see what's going on. I like to always tip them up after getting them out because they're full of oil and I hate flinging oil everywhere. So once we get the oil out of there, it's always good to check the plungers here for the jakes and the IVAs as well, just to make sure that one's not seized, although that would generally cause a weak or dead cylinder. So once that puppy's got most of the oil out, we're going to go set her on the table here, and then we'll take a look in the overhead and see what the heck's going on. So I actually asked the customer, I said, do you still have the old IVA housing? Can I see it? And yeah, they had it actually sitting on the table here. And what do you think I found there? The O-ring that's supposed to be in the valve cover base. So that was the cause. A lot of times they'll get stick to the underside of the IVA housings. They don't give you the O-rings when you buy the housing. So yeah, I was just missing the O-ring there on the valve cover base. So really all we had to do is get a new one. I had one already. I have a big O-ring kit. So put the new O-ring on, put the old IVA housing back on, and torqued everything in place here. And yeah, that's a pretty simple one. I like these kind where it's something that is very specific, but I kind of know, I don't want to say I know more than other people, but I know a lot about these engines, so I know the little tricks about them. Sometimes that someone that's not quite as familiar may have missed on it. That was an honest mistake. He did fix the other problem they were having with the IVAs, which is kind of surprising because this one wouldn't have been getting really as much oil pressure as the forward and rear housings because of how much oil was leaking out of there. Obviously, quite a bit of oil was getting to it, though. You could see how much was leaking there. And yeah, once I got these suckers dialed in and torqued down, all we have to do is run it again and make sure it's not leaking and clear the codes. That's what we're going to do. Now, people ask me, and I've said several times, that the C13, specifically this style, the KCB, is my favorite Cat engine. You might be wondering, well, why? Why not a C15? Why not a 3126? Well, there's various reasons. First one is that was the first truck engine I ever rebuilt, was a KCB C13. It was in a tour bus, so it was, well, not technically a truck engine in that instance, but I really like these engines. They're pretty simple. There's no liner protrusion really. Well, there is a liner protrusion measurement, but not like the C15s where you end up cutting them and stuff. There's a single head gasket. There's not like the C15s that have a ton of different parts and seals between the head and the block. The pan gasket, the valve cover gasket are much simpler. There are some things that are harder though. The IVA housings on these, doing the overhead's a little harder on these, but overall, they are still my favorite cat engine to work on. So running this puppy again, and yeah, as you can see there, no big oil leaks. Just have a rag there to make sure it's not purging. Look at that, no big leaks. That's what you want to see. So this one, yep, ran fine. I did an IVA function test after this. They all did good. Another successful job. Thanks for watching.